innocent civilians through no fault of their own, through the means of years of cultural and economic oppression, forcing them to stay into your states, forcing them to abide by laws limiting their liberties, regardless of social contract or not. They are actively forced against their will every day to abide by cultures and laws that they do not want to ascribe to. All of that is not legitimate, regardless of any potential benefits that we can get out of imprisoning these people. We do not let you take somebody's liberty and put them in prison because it will deter someone in spite of that person being innocent. We do not let you put someone in prison because they may have committed a crime and this adds to our general social benefit. We cannot do this to the same extent. We cannot hold them economically hostage in a state that they do not feel they belong to, merely because for years they were economically oppressed and cannot get out of there. Regardless of outcomes of this debate, we win this debate on that alone. It is entirely illegitimate, and we have to focus on narrative within this context. Before that, two points of rebuttal. One, Scott talks a lot about permanent. So, two things about this. One, Ayala was pretty clear with his definition of permanent, saying that within our case, it's quite reasonable to say you can come back at some point. Permanent is to say that we're not funding you to go on vacations, for example. It means that if you want to re-enter your state after you've given up your passport, you need to reapply for a new passport. Obviously, this is a difficult thing to do, but we think to the extent that today, when American citizens give up their passport in order, for example, to serve in a foreign government, they can still re-enter that state after applications for a new passport. The same thing applies here. So it's not necessarily a forever and ever kind of thing. But secondly, and crucially, note that also means that it affects the gravitas of the decision. So if it is true that it's quite permanent, they're going to do a lot, and have to do a lot more work in saying we're essentially forcing people out than saying the Daily Mail are going to be shits to them. Let's talk about that for a second, because Scott says to you, look, states can be terrible. In my argument, while Scott is right, states can be terrible, they sometimes are terrible, they're terrible in status quo, we're going to talk about the incentive to not be terrible and why this motion affects that. Note something that didn't happen on opening opposition so far. But a few things. Our main problem with OO is that they're describing status quo, in which the Daily Mail says these people should just leave, in which political groups ignore the economically oppressed, in which social pressure exists from racist groups within society to say you should just leave. Because here's the thing, racists don't really stop and think, well, we probably shouldn't say that because, like, they probably can't afford to move, right? That's not the process that goes through their mind when they say, if you believe in Islam, you should get the hell out of our state. So we think they're defining status quo and not explaining in any way how it shifts. Let's talk about how it shifts. So we say that leaving is very difficult. It is not a decision made easily. Even if you are very poor, you still have a family around you, you still have a community around you, you still have language barriers for moving other places, you still have roots that you've put down in this place. So it is likely, we think, so while our motion only affects those who are too poor to leave on their own, though it's crucial to notice, it doesn't affect all of those who are too poor to leave on their own, but specifically the subset of poor people who feel so disenfranchised from the state, so culturally separate from the state, that they feel they cannot potentially make their lives in this state work. Now, I'll talk to you about that, about why these people are likely to be right in thinking that they're better off somewhere else. Now let's talk to you about what happens politically within this. So the bottom line of this is to say, politically, it would be very ineffective to further disenfranchise these groups under the notion that their quantities are not going to dwindle in a substantive way that would affect what little political power these groups have in societies today, with the comparative being they don't have that much political sway today. So on the one side, there's no real political incentive to further kick a horse while it's down and to ostracize them even more. Moreover, we say there is an incentive to political help. Why does that happen? A, we say you manage by specifically helping these individuals to create a large voter base specifically tailored to you. So if it does happen that some politicians try and ostracize these people even more, it is politically advantageous for a group to take specifically these groups and put that at the front of their platform. B, we say partisan politics means that at the point where one side opposes something, it is usually politically advantageous for the other side to support this. How does this take effect? So when you have a a conservative government in power, we think nothing is likely to stay, in that the conservative government in power will still be trying to ostracize these groups, and the liberal government will still, under this notions of liberty and freedom of the things that it believes in, still be trying to help these groups. The flip side, however, shifts. Why? At the point at which it is the liberal states at the head of the liberal governments at the head, you now get an additional incentive for the conservative governments as well to be supportive of these people. This means that opposing liberal politics within governments now gives a political incentive for them to cross the aisle and also be helpful towards those most disadvantaged. Scott.
Given the massive rise in anti-immigrant sentiment across Europe, why do countries not have an incentive to create anti-immigrant policies to try and prevent individuals choosing to go to that specific country?
So we think they do. We think that's true on both sides of the house. We think the mechanisms that we're adding are specifically mechanisms that to an extent counter that and certainly don't facilitate it. Secondly, let's talk about societal effects on narrative. So essentially, the opposition case boils down to, if they can leave, they become heckled by racists telling them they should leave, telling them, you can do it, why don't you? Side of the house is going to be changed because most of these people don't stop and think, well, they can't leave economically, so maybe we should change the kind of things we're talking about. But two, though there is a counter-narrative that is created under our side of the house. The counter-narrative created is, if you can leave and you opt into staying, then we do have a cultural common ground to discuss. This brings you all the benefits Ayal talks about creating about creating a cohesive narrative between different groups within the state, something that gets no response from their side of the house. So because they have every right to leave and you cannot prevent them, and because it generally leads to good things, please.